many women are like, oh, I'll wind down in the evening with a glass of wine and turn Netflix on and that will calm me down. But it's actually not calming down your nervous system. We may feel like it is, but the alcohol is actually revving it up, making our liver work harder. And the Netflix in the evening is giving our eyes this blue light, so it's making it harder for our body to produce melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And then we wonder why we don't sleep very well.
I started tracking with an app, so I measure my temperature every morning, and it has given me so much knowledge around your mood, and you can track any cramps or pains or headaches or anything that you might have.
Dancing 5 to 6 days a week and really wanting to be the best, I started going, well, I'm going to restrict my food intake. I'm going to focus on, working out. Little did I know at the time, because I didn't have the knowledge, but I was also doing the worst thing I possibly could for my strength and my endurance.
It's not about, okay, we're just going to change your eating habits. It's about looking at the past and looking at the present and also looking at the future and building that holistic picture. I like to work in trees, like I wanted to know my mind better and what it was saying. I wanted to understand my body better and what it was doing and how it was reacting. And then there's the third element of kind of your soul as such.
I think for women, especially as we start to hit perimenopause and menopause, we need to be doing strength training. It's fundamental. We start to lose our bone mass. We're at a higher risk of osteopenia and osteoporosis. And as we age, it's much harder to maintain our muscle mass. So, if you're a woman starting to hit sort of over 35, then now it's really fundamental to start to add in some strength training.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the Stories to Remember podcast. I have a very lovely guest with me today who is on the other side of the world than I am. So where it's evening for her, it's morning for me. So yeah, hello to you, Kate. Thank you so much for being on with me here today.
Thanks for having me on the show. I am super looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, same. And I think, for anyone listening today, like Kate she has a whole laundry list of things that she does. She is a Pilates instructor. She's a nutritionist. She has her own studio. She has her online platform. She's a mom. And well, we're going to hear a lot more about all of the things that she's doing. So I'm very excited for that. I always like to start off with sharing a little bit more about Kate's personal story, and there's no better person to do that than Kate herself. So, Kate, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about what you did over the years and what got you to where you are today.
Sure. So originally I thought my career was going to be in dancing. I was, had aspiring dreams of becoming a professional dancer, but unfortunately at the age of 16, I tore the meniscus in my knee. So that was shocking at the time, kind of, put my dreams on hold. And I was actually battling some, eating disorder issues with being a dancer. And so my brain went, well, let's move into a different field. And, I really loved health and nutrition. So I ended up going off to university and studying to become a nutritionist and a food scientist. So started my career into health that way pretty early on. And then at the time, I still loved dance. I was teaching dancing on the side, and a girlfriend said to me, she just qualified in Pilates, and this was early 2000s, so Pilates was kind of becoming a bit more mainstream. And she said, "Why don't you go off and do the Pilates course? You'd be fantastic. You get some work until you make it in the sort of a full-time job in nutrition." And I thought, "Oh, sure, why not? I've done Pilates before. I've enjoyed it." And at that time, I had obviously done the meniscus in my knee. I'd torn hamstrings. I torn ligaments in my ankles. I had chronic lower back pain and SIJ pain. And I did the Pilates course and started doing Pilates regularly and healed my own body from pain and so many of these injuries that I then went, I want to incorporate this and do this as part of my career to help other people with their pain and injuries too. So I segued into working for a food company part-time as a nutritionist and taught her at different studios around Melbourne, in Pilates studios. And then I had the opportunity to go across to Europe in 2009 and teach in Switzerland and Spain as well. So I took, those offers up. And then once I came back to Melbourne, I opened my own Pilates and wellness studio. And that's been open for about 14 years now. And then a few years ago, with the interest I was getting from people that were moving away, they'd come to the studio and then they'd move and they still wanted to, connect and do Pilates. I developed my online platform, so my online side of the business, where I have a membership that has Pilates and recipes and focuses on women's health as well. So I kind of tie it all in together, some in person, some online. And, I'm married with 2 girls as well. So throw that into the mix and it makes a pretty busy life.
It does. And I was sharing with you earlier how much a fan I am personally of Pilates as well, and how it has changed and transformed a lot of my life. So yeah, I just absolutely love what you're doing, and I hear you and how it can really heal the body as such as well too. I would love, because I think what we hear quite often, especially if someone has had a dancer background, inflammation and just really the pain in the body is a quite common element, as well as the fact that people push themselves so hard or try to have a certain body by limiting their eating as such. Can you share a bit more about how that journey was for you? Because you were young when you were in that world, and a lot is going on. So
Yeah, well, I think, as a dancer, you're constantly comparing yourself to others because you want to be the best. You're also in a leotard 24/7 in front of a mirror. And, the sort of the dance world, there is that stigma of looking a certain way, of being thin, long neck, long limbs. And so from an early age, having that sort of reinforced all the time almost, mentally for me was really hard. And so probably around the age of like 13 to 14, when I was becoming more serious about my dancing and, dancing 5 to 6 days a week and really wanting to be the best, I started going, well, I'm going to restrict my food intake. I'm going to focus on, working out, getting as strong as I can. But little did I know at the time, because I didn't have the knowledge, but I was also doing the worst thing I possibly could for my strength and my endurance, because I wasn't feeding myself properly. I wasn't getting the nutrition I needed to stop injuries occurring, to stop fatigue, and all of those things, and illnesses cropping up all the time. So the restriction was a way for me to find control and to think I had control. But at the end of the day, it was very detrimental. And it took me many years to work through, working through with professionals, obviously finding that connection and enjoyment again with food that wasn't there previously. And, it's taken time, but I've found that balance and, being able to overcome that. And now I love food. I am able to work with people in the nutrition field with their intakes as well. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to go into the nutrition field, to help myself, but also help other young dancers that may have been going through this as well.
was there a specific moment where you realized for yourself, like, okay, I need to do things differently?
I think there wasn't a specific moment as such, but there was a time when I was sort of 17 and 18, and that's when you start to hang out with your friends more and you start to eat out more and you can't control as much. And that's when I started to notice that this is really an issue, because there was more people sort of noticing how restrictive I was being. I'd kind of gotten away with it a little bit more to that point, as in my family, just like, that's what Kate does. Kate's a dancer. That's, almost normal as part of the dancer world. But when I started expanding my friends network, then that's when I started to realize, what, this isn't life. This isn't normal as such. And I think that's when it was really the catalyst that I thought, I don't want to live like this because I'm missing out on the fun of, relaxing around food and eating out with friends and, going traveling the world and trying different things because I wasn't able to control everything anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if I look back at least my youth as well as a gymnast, a lot of this resonates where you're like in short little play suits as such, when you have to work out, and it's like you start to notice as you're growing and you're becoming a teenager and your body is changing, you kind of want to press it back down into that little child's body, or at least that was for me the case, where it's like, oh, I don't know if I like all of the change that is happening with my body. So you try to control that element where it's inevitable. It's, yeah, it's, you're turning into a female as such as well. And what I've seen personally is that a lot of people or athletes, and especially females, are going through that quite often as well. Is that the focus that you had originally when you started working with people as well, like specifically dancers or specifically athletes or females, or did you niche it down to some extent?
Yeah, so originally, my plan was to work with dancers or athletes because after I had sort of finished my dance career, I moved into doing triathlons. Of course, something else there. I was running and cycling and swimming, so still being really active. But, once you get into the nutrition field, you actually find it's actually really hard to work with only athletes. So I actually ended up working with, a range of people, people wanting to lose weight, people struggling with autoimmune conditions. And I think as I got more experience with that and more experience with working with women's health, I realized that there was a gap there. Women are often struggling to lose weight. And especially as we start to reach that perimenopause and menopause age, they weren't overeating. They were doing too much exercise. They really weren't eating enough, but they still weren't losing weight. So that whole sort of calories in, calories out thing wasn't working, which is where I started to dive deeper in more to look at people's stress levels, to look at what symptoms they're getting with their perimenopause and menopause and what's their hormones doing. And so that sort of guided me more into that women's health field.
I love that. We briefly touched on that when we were speaking earlier as well, that how the women's health field is still very much under researched. What are kind of the key things for you that you've noticed throughout your career, working with women as well, that is not so much talked about yet in society or in the mainstream, or where there's lack of knowledge when it comes to women's health?
I think our menstrual cycle and our hormones is that biggest gap. And there is more people talking about it now. There's more experts coming out in, that are in the women's health field talking about the menstrual cycle and how we can, sync our workouts to our menstrual cycle and sync our business tasks to our menstrual cycle, and also think about the food we're eating. And if we're looking at intermittent fasting, how to sync that with our menstrual cycle. So I really think that is the sort of the forefront coming through now. There's more research coming through, which is fantastic. And, previously it almost was a bit of a taboo subject. No one wanted to talk about it. Nobody would talk about a menstrual cycle. They didn't want to mention it. So I think it's great that it's, coming out a lot more now, because women's hormones is something we need to think about. And, especially when it comes to people wanting to lose weight or developing these autoimmune conditions, there's issues with underlying stress and hormones that we haven't previously paid attention to. And I think that awareness now is building a lot more.
What can people do to learn more about hormone health and how much it impacts them on a day to day? What would be your tips or places for them to start?
There's a few really great experts out there now. Dr. Mindy Pels is fantastic. So she talks a lot about the menstrual cycle and syncing it with, if you want to do intermittent fasting or different food and exercise. So she's definitely somebody that I would check out in that field. And then also there's a few people on, in podcasts now as well. There's a lot more experts that are coming out and speaking about hormones. And I think the easiest thing women can do is start paying attention to their cycle, even if it's just as basic as tracking their cycle. How many days is your cycle? Is it regular? Is it irregular? What type of symptoms do you have in that sort of lead up to getting your period? That week before your period, when those sort of PMS symptoms may start to kick in, it could be bloating or breast tenderness or night sweats or, cramping. So what's there for you, and just taking note of that, even writing it down and seeing if you make changes to your routines, just small changes, does that have an effect on what symptoms you're getting in your cycle?
I personally started on this journey of tracking like a couple of years ago. I was on my personal development journey, and I was like, okay, there is this element where I do not know enough about, which was basically my body. I always like to work in trees, like I wanted to know my mind better and what it was saying, wanted to understand my body better and what it was doing and how it was reacting. And then there's the third element of kind of your soul as such. But in order to do my body, I started tracking with an app. So I personally measure my temperature every morning, and it has given me so much knowledge around just the things that are happening throughout the cycle. And it's really nice because you can track your mood and you can track any cramps or pains or headaches or anything that you might have. And it's also giving you the power to understand when there is something wrong with your body, like, hey, is it maybe part of my cycle? And if it's part of my cycle, then why is this happening right now? What can I do differently to overcome that? Have you personally experienced a really big shift once you started tracking your cycle as well?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was younger, I actually lost my cycle. So, part of that restricted eating is I didn't have a cycle for many years because I was chronically, underfeeding myself, underweight, and our body won't prioritize our sex hormones if we're not getting enough food. It's going to prioritize survival. So, I didn't have a cycle for a number of years, and then I was on the pill, like so many women are. So again, wasn't really having a cycle, but still thinking I kind of was, because, you'd have the sugar pills and you'd have a bleed, but not really putting the two together, that that's not really your cycle. And then, got off the pill, started having a regular cycle, but it was a bit all over the place. I had two girls, everything was great. And after having my kids, my cycle became irregular. It became heavy. I got lots of pain that I'd never had before. So I actually went off and visited a Chinese medicine doctor and had acupuncture, and, again, went back and addressed stress levels and nutrition and started tracking my cycle more and paying attention to it more. And that made huge differences from there. It took a while. So that's the other thing I think women don't think about. They think, oh, well, it'll just go back to normal fairly quickly in a month or two. But really, it took me, probably a good 8 to 12 months to get my cycle back to where it should be, and it being regular and not having as many symptoms coming through. And then, tracking how I was feeling throughout my cycle and just educating myself on, the different phases of the cycle and what changes and why you might be feeling great around the time of your ovulation because, your estrogen, your progesterone's going up and your hair looks nicer and your skin's all glowing. When you find those things out, it makes more sense. And you're like, oh, well, that's why I'm feeling really good, because technically my body is preparing to get pregnant, or this is the optimal time to try to get pregnant. So your body is trying to, function at its best to find a mate and create a human. Not that we always want that to happen, but hormone wise, that's what's happening around ovulation. So learning more about that, tracking my cycle made, changed everything for me, even just, business wise. I started changing when I was scheduling, activities, having more of that sort of outward activities like podcasts and things earlier in my cycle and that week before my period when, you're not feeling like being social or outgoing, making sure that I do more of my admin tasks, less sort of podcast interviews, and building in more downtime to my work days as well.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a huge fan of that as well, and I speak a lot to my clients as well to try to do that. And I think one of the key things for me that really changed the way I was thinking throughout my cycle as well was that last week of your before your menstruation happens. That is usually when you start to get more negative. And once I started to realize this, I just started to avoid the mirror, for example, during that week, so that or avoid is a big word, but like at least not look at it as much, because I would just pick on myself, because indeed your hair might not be as voluminous as it was a week before, or you do not feel the greatest, so you're automatically start to get more negative and pick. And at the same time, in my business earlier on, when you start your business, you had a great idea at the beginning of your cycle, and then you come to the end and it's kind of like, oh, maybe this idea wasn't so great. And you pick a new idea and start the same cycle, until I realized, like, oh, actually, no, this is just the week of the month where I'm not too excited, or I don't believe as much as I maybe do any other time. So that was a huge eye opener for me.
Yeah, well, one of my nutrition clients that I was working with recently, she came to see me because she wanted to lose weight, and she started crying, during her consult. I mean, when people have been carrying weight for a while and they've really struggled with losing that weight, you can become quite emotional. But she said, it's a few days before I'm about to menstruate, and I'm emotional, and I'm like, that's totally fine. And she said, when I start menstruating, she's like, it's like a relief to my body. It's like I just feel so much better. And I'm like, yes, because as soon as you start menstruating, your estrogen levels go up and your mood picks up. Like estrogen, we will think clearer, we'll have less brain fog, we'll feel happier. And the way she described it as like, it feels like a relief, it was just the perfect sort of analogy of what happens hormone wise in that difference between the week before and then when it happens. So, having that sort of insight and sometimes listening to the words that our clients use, it's really useful because it can just be the perfect analogy.
Yeah. So how does that, because that also loops back to working out, and how we should be working out throughout our cycle. So give us some insights around that. What should we be looking out for, and how should we work out throughout the different phases?
So, in the first phase of our cycle, which is roughly around that sort of day 1 to day 10, we can be doing, great, whatever type of workouts we want, really. They could be a mix of cardio and gym. We can go pretty hard, we're going to be feeling really good, have lots of strength and energy. And then when we hit sort of that ovulation phase, which is around day sort of 10 to 15 for most people, that's when we're going to be feeling even more amazing. So if we want to go for a PB, a personal best, or we really want to push like heavier weights, this is the time to do it. It's around that ovulation period, those days 10 to 15. So, maybe you've been doing some strength work in the gym, but you really want to start to up the weights. Those 5 days are really when you can push your body really hard. So definitely keep that in mind with your workouts. Then we move on to the third phase of our cycle, which is around sort of day 16 to 20. So just a shorter period, and that's similar to days 1 and 10. It's sort of another power phase where we can still work out and feel really good, still do a mix of cardio and strength. But then as we hit sort of day 20 to 28, that last sort of week of our cycle, that's when we want to start to downregulate those high intensity activities and lean into more things like Pilates and yoga and walking. And, if you're going to do weights, stick to lighter weights. So just being really gentle with our bodies then, and even food wise, we might feel like we need some more complex carbs. That's sort of the week that women often have cravings and that. And so we need to nurture our body. So we might include some more things like sweet potato and quinoa and, wild rice and these complex carbs that are going to help progesterone start to rise and help us feel really good and nourish our body during that week before we start to menstruate.
What could be the downside of not so much listening to your cycle and just pushing yourself all the way through?
You can generally be at a higher risk of injury. So their studies are showing that women that last week before their period, there's a link between an increased risk of injury, especially ACLs. So they've done some studies with female athletes when they've done ACL injuries, and it tends to be higher in that last week before we menstruate. So definitely, if you're pushing it the whole way through, you can be at a higher risk of injury, but also just a higher risk of, burnout, and then also picking up more sort of colds and flus and just running our immune system down. So, when women get to that sort of point where they're like, I'm feeling really burnt out, their adrenals have been overworking, they haven't been, nourishing or taking breaks, then that's when we're at that higher risk of, either feeling like we just can't go on, we pick up a bug, or we pick up an injury that it may seem like we really didn't do anything much different, but all of a sudden we now have a knee injury or we've strained our calf, and it kind of feels like it's come out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's fascinating if you think about it, that our body is changing, and most of the time we're not even realizing as such, so we just continue in the same way, and our body is not able to get with that either. You hear it a lot in athletes as well, where they try to manage it with their cycle, and where they one week really strong and push themselves, and the other week all of a sudden they just need to lie down and they can't even get a 1K run in, for example. And it's like, that's how much our body is changing throughout that cycle. So yeah, I find it very fascinating that it works this way, and that we're not yet there, that we're all having this knowledge.
Well, it's hard too because our world is designed for men, everything, our work days are 9 to 5 every day. We don't change the last week, if you don't have that flexibility, the last week before we menstruate, you can't just say to your boss, oh, hey, actually, I need some more downtime this week. Can I work a few less hours? Like most people can't do that unless you work for yourself and you can create your own schedule. But in an ideal world for women, that's what we would be doing. We'd be, on show for that sort of first 20 days of the month. And then that last week, we would be, withdrawing a little bit, creating more downtime, working less, doing simpler tasks that don't require as much complex thinking. But unfortunately, the world wasn't designed by women. But hopefully for the future, there are some countries in the world that are starting to add in menstruation leave. So you can get 3 days off a month that you can put in. So, there are small changes coming through, which is fantastic. And I think as more women learn more about their cycle, especially younger women, if you can utilize, and lean into your cycle from a younger age, it's like getting a health check every month. And then if we compare that with what we're doing, mentally and emotionally, then we can really thrive and get so much more out of our, work or out of our relationships than what we have previously.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. I also, based on research, like it is showing that more and more females are starting their own business. And when you dive into that research as well, a lot of these reasons is because um, the females just want to live their life on their terms, and they do not want to push when they need a day off as such. And it's great to see that we're starting to see that difference, and that people are choosing their health, and put that on the forefront, because ultimately without your health you don't really have anything, right? So yeah, it's important we take care
Exactly.
of it.
Well, I think the last couple of years too was, almost a little bit of a wake up call for everybody. People started to think more about what they really want, and if we only have so much time, where do we want to spend it? Who do we want to spend it with? So I think that was fantastic for people to maybe look at starting their own business or changing or moving to somewhere that they will really, flourish and enjoy. So I think that was, one of the good things to come out of the last couple of years. And definitely, the rise of sort of the female entrepreneur has been coming through the last few years, which is always really great to see too.
Yeah, agree. So we've talked about this topic, women's health, for or at least a part of the women's health. The other part of the women's health is also the nutrition and the movement element in itself. I, as a certified holistic health coach, I've learned kind of the importance of healing your body through food, and also taking in account the way that we move is very important. So, well, as you are the expert here on the call with me today, share a little bit, if you don't mind, with us around how food can really impact us.
Well, food is like, they say that our gut is our second brain. So it's our gut health is super important. And what we put into our gut literally builds every cell in our body. So what you are made of is really the food that you're putting into your body. So if you are putting in processed food that's higher in sugar and higher in seed oils and bad fats, then our cells that then build into tissues that then build into organs and muscle are being made out of those things. So it's sort of no wonder to think that you often feel tired, or maybe you have, excess weight you can't lose, or you might find that you can't think clearly, or you forget things, or you just feel sluggish. So, we think of the food building our building blocks. So if we eat healthier foods, then we're going to have more energy. We're going to feel stronger. We're going to be more resilient when it comes to our immune system. So I think if we think of food just in basic terms, of it being either fueling us or negatively affecting us, leaning into those healthy foods builds everything into our body. So our gut health is super important. The food we intake is super important. And then, it's not saying that certain foods are good or certain foods are bad. It's just trying to lean into those whole foods like fruits and veggies and nuts and seeds and grains, and good sources of protein like, meat and fish and eggs if you include those in your diet. So I think variety is key, and then really dialing into that gut health will help to reduce inflammation, improve your immune system and reduce your risk of disease overall. So, ultimately increasing our longevity.
I think one of the things you mentioned as well before is that you had people that you worked with most of the time come to you because they either have an autoimmune disease or they might want to lose weight. What is kind of the start? Where do you start if someone comes to you, or if someone has experienced that and they're listening to this? What's the first step that they should be taking?
Well, I think the first step is to, realize that, it's accumulation. So it's accumulation over time, and it's not your fault. So people love, I work with a client and they're like, I know what I should be eating. So it's my fault because I keep eating, the ice cream or the cookies. And I'm like, it's not your fault. These foods have been designed to be addictive. Like, that's the number one thing the companies want, is they want you to buy them and eat them. So they will fill them with, exotoxins or chemicals that make you want to reach into that packet and take more out. So, it's not our fault with the food system that we have. So I always say to people, there's no need to have guilt or blame. Okay. So remove that from the table. And then, they've usually found their way to me because they've decided that they want to make a change. So making that commitment to themselves is a really big step, and something that, should be rewarded, because it's hard and it's scary to make change. And so I always say to them, we just need to make really small steps and small changes, just one at a time. Otherwise, it feels so overwhelming that you just go, this is just too hard. I'm going to give up. So when I'm working with a client, we do a thorough health history. So I will look back to, how they were born, were they a cesarean birth or a vaginal birth, to look at, what bacteria they received from their mum, how did they grow up? Was there any emotional trauma, any physical traumas that happened? Were they living near mold? So all of that sort of stuff comes into play. And then I'll look at everyday habits. So, how are they sleeping? When are they eating? What types of foods are they eating? How are they moving their body? How are they managing their stress levels? And what support they have? Are they living with family? Are they living by themselves? Do they have friends that they can connect with? Because as we know, that support network can really make a difference too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find it so good. All of the things that you just shared just goes to show how much there is at play. It's not just one thing. It's not about, okay, we're just going to change your eating habits. It's about looking at the past and looking at the present and also looking at the future and building that holistic picture as such. And again, building awareness around certain elements as well.
Yeah. And for women, especially, stress is a really big one. Most women are usually under eating, over exercising, and they have high loads of stress. And once we dial up their food and actually give them more energy intake and reduce the amount of exercise they're doing, and then add in some stress relieving techniques. So, we've all heard of meditation, but that doesn't work for everybody. But maybe you could, add in some breath work. So inhaling through the nose for say 4 counts, and then trying to stretch out that exhale for 6 to 8 counts. Simple and easy to do. You can do it anywhere and helps to drop us back into that parasympathetic state. So our rest and digest state where our body feels safe and our stress levels will start to lower. And if that's not your key, we will talk about, getting outside, getting into nature. That can help lower stress levels. Grounding, connecting your feet to the earth, whether or not that's grass or sand. There's lots of things you can do. Journaling, calling your friend, connecting with people, stimulating your vagus nerve. So singing and gargling and humming can also stimulate our vagus nerve and help reduce inflammation. So building in some of these simple stress relieving techniques throughout the day rather than sort of saving them up for the evening, because many women are like, oh, I'll wind down in the evening with a glass of wine and turn Netflix on and that will calm me down. But it's actually not calming down your nervous system. We may feel like it is, but the alcohol is actually revving it up, making our liver work harder. And the Netflix in the evening is giving our eyes this blue light. So it's making it harder for our body to produce melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. And then we wonder why we don't sleep very well. And so that cycle continues. So if we can just build in some of those simple stress relieving techniques throughout our day, once we start to add that in with a lot of my clients, they actually find the weight just starts to drop off easily.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've heard about as well is the emotional weight. Sometimes it's not about, maybe you do everything right in regards to eating and working out, but it's the emotional weight that you're holding on to, that you haven't worked through just yet, or is simply indeed stuck into your body. Do you have any practices, particularly on that as well, that can really help? Or have you seen any ways of how that can really change for people?
Yeah, so especially when it comes to Pilates, because I do a lot of rehab work. So I will have people that come in with quite a lot of pain, and we will work together. And, their pain, they might come in with lower back pain that's a 9, and we can get it down to say like a 4 or a 5 with doing strength exercises and releasing. But that last, couple of numbers, there's usually something underlying. And whether or not that's been a physical trauma in the past or an emotional one that they haven't dealt with, the body holds on to it. And it's often, being in the position that I'm in, I work closely with clients, I'll often refer them, maybe it might be a psychologist. Maybe they might need some, body work done with massage. It depends on the person, obviously depends on the trauma. But once they find what they need to help release that trauma and process that trauma, whether or not it's pain or weight or, an autoimmune condition and things like that, we'll start to see improvements in their health. It's pretty amazing. And again, it's not a quick transition. And some people, because it's some type of trauma, they're really resistant to wanting to get to that point or have to process it. So I've had clients where I've been working with them for years, and then, they've gotten to a certain point and they're managing, but then something else flares up in their life. Maybe there's an accident, with a loved one. And so more stress gets loaded on them. And that's when that previous trauma will kind of flare up in their body. And that's when we can often highlight there's a relationship back to this. So, if you're open and willing, it would be great to, go see this practitioner or go speak to someone and start to work through it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's another element where thankfully we're shining more and more light on and sharing it more with people, because I think it's sometimes so buried in our subconscious mind that we're not even realizing it ourselves, how much it might be impacting us in all areas of our life.
For sure. And I'll have some clients, I've worked with them for 10, 12 years, and they're still not ready to work through that trauma. And that's okay. That's their journey in life. Everybody will take different periods of time. And, I think if you can work with somebody that you trust, it makes a huge difference. But, I always say we're on our own journeys. And as a practitioner, if you've got practitioners listening in, we can work with people and take them to a certain level. But then, it has to be their choice to then take that next step. And sometimes they might not want to do that. And we have to realize, from a practitioner on our end, that that's okay. We're doing, the best we can. We're keeping them safe. We're keeping them moving, or, whatever, practice you might be in. And we have to realize that there comes a point where we have to step back and let them, and when they're ready, they will take that next step, if they ever are ready. Not everybody will be ready to go on that journey either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important to highlight, and important to be there, I think, as a practitioner, but also when people go through it from a family or a friend element. I think once you maybe have gone through a bit more of an awareness or a personal development journey where you've really opened your eyes to certain elements, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to get everyone to that same place. It's about being there and supporting them, but at the same time also being okay with letting it go, and let them figure out their own path in life as such.
Exactly. And that could be really hard to do, from someone on the outside, because you only want to see the best for your client or your loved one. But sometimes also it's easy for us to see being on the outside, and it's not as easy to see when you're living it yourself. That sort of self perspective is not easy to find, especially when there has been, trauma involved.
Yeah. So you mentioned that sometimes people come to you with pain to Pilates as well, and you've experienced this yourself, and how much you've been able to really, change that into not feeling the pain in your body anymore. What is it that Pilates does that makes it so special that it can do that?
Well, I think because it's a full body system. So, most often if you have knee pain, you'll go to the physio and they'll give you knee strengthening exercises most of the time. But when you come to Pilates, we are going to look at your whole body. We're going to look at the whole body move and look at your movement patterns. And most often than not, when I'm looking at somebody that may have knee pain, it's actually coming because their ankle is pronating in, or their hip is, internally rotated, or actually their opposite shoulder is hiked and they're, leaning. So looking at the whole body is a huge thing that I think Pilates is so great at integrating the system together. And then also connecting our breath. So there's not many other sort of movement modalities besides maybe yoga where we actually sync our breath to our movements and pay attention to our inhale and our exhale and what muscles we're activating with our breath. So that, as we were sort of talking about before, can drop us back into that parasympathetic state, that rest and digest state, when we're slowing down our breathing, connecting to our breathing, doing that nasal breathing. And so, I'm sure your listeners have done a Pilates class before, and their instructors like, inhale and lift the leg. And as you exhale, engage your pelvic floor. And you're thinking, I don't have time to be thinking about my shopping list or where I have to go, because I'm trying to pull this in and exhale and lift that. And so it keeps you in the present moment. And I think a lot of exercise, people will jump on a treadmill and watch TV. So they're doing the movement, but they're not connected to the movement. And I think that's where Pilates really shines, because we focus on form and our breath and our core and pelvic floor engagement. And it keeps us really present in our body so that we're getting the most out of our movements.
Yeah, I think that's a really key thing for me as well. I tend to work out in the morning, but there are days where when I had a really intense day at work, I tend to just take a 20, 30-minute other Pilates sessions on top of it, just so I can drop back into my body. Even if it's a very easy flow, it just helps you to, yeah, to drop out of your mind into your body and connect back to that.
Yeah, you usually feel, so many people will say they'll finish a class and they said, oh, when I drive home, I have to put the rear vision mirror higher, because they're actually physically now taller in the car that they can't see out of it. So it really is grounding, connecting to that breath. You do really feel present in your body. But, we do lots of spinal movement and articulation work. So we're working strength and mobility and flexibility. So we're working it all together. Whereas a lot of sort of, if you go to the gym and you're lifting weights, you're just working the strength. You're not tending to work flexibility and mobility at the same time. A lot of the time, it's kind of individualized. And I think that's where, if you can do a class and feel taller and more energized and more calm and get the strength and the mobility benefits at the same time, then that's where, for me, that's what really drew me into Pilates.
There are quite a lot of different type of Pilates these days. What is your favorite? What's your best recommended type of Pilates? And should we mix it up, or should we stick with one of them?
Well, I think mixing it up is always great, because whether or not you're doing mat Pilates or you're doing reformer, or what I teach in my studio is, it's called Studio Pilates here in Australia, where we use the Cadillac, the reformer, the Wonder Chair, and the ladder barrel. So the bigger pieces of Pilates equipment, you'll get benefits from all of them because they'll work you in different ways. So often people think mat Pilates is going to be easy because it's just a mat. It's actually most of the time harder because you don't get any help from the equipment. So when you're working with a reformer or a piece of Pilates, the bigger pieces of Pilates equipment, we can put spring loads on so we can actually help you do the movement easier. But when you're on the mat, it's you and your mat. So you've really got to work with your own body resistance and build up that strength. So I think that's one of those sort of underlying things. Everybody thinks mat's going to be easy, but it's not. So I definitely love changing it up. If someone's new to Pilates, go to a studio and work with an instructor so you can really learn the fundamentals of Pilates, of how to connect to your breath, of how to connect to your core, of your pelvic floor and your transversus abdominis, and really finding that form and familiarity in the exercises. And once you've got that foundation, then play around, with trying different classes and trying different instructors, because everybody brings something different. You'll have one instructor like me that has a dance background. So, I love to work with rehab work, but then also creating choreography and flow. But you'll have another instructor, that maybe they had a corporate background. So, they just really love doing, repetition and really looking at the nitty gritty of smaller movements. So you will pick up different things from different instructors as well.
Yeah. Do you think it's good to combine it with, for example, more strength training and cardio training, or are you a fan of mainly focusing on Pilates, but maybe then in a different type of Pilates versions?
I think for women, especially as we start to hit perimenopause and menopause, we need to be doing strength training. It's fundamental. We start to lose our bone mass. We're at a higher risk of osteopenia and osteoporosis. And as we age, it's much harder to maintain our muscle mass. So, if you're a woman starting to hit sort of over 35, then now it's really fundamental to start to add in some strength training. And, I say to my ladies in class, Pilates can be one of your sort of strength training sessions or two of your strength training sessions a week, but we need to be adding in resistance. So we need to add in hand weights. I need to put those springs up on the reformer if they're in the studio, or you need to be working with, a decent TheraBand or knee band. So adding in that resistance is really important. And then if you can start to have a session that could be in the gym, or it still can be in the Pilates studio, where you add a lot of load and heavier weight, but you do the lower reps, then that's fantastic too. So generally a minimum of 2 strength sessions a week, and they can be Pilates as long as you've got an instructor or you're following online, and you're using hand weights at home, and we've got that resistance. And then on the flip side of that, we need a balance of our cardio. So our cardio is fantastic for our heart health, for helping with longevity, even our mental health as well. So a mix and a balance of our strength and our cardio is important. I think for women, as we age, we need to make sure that, if we're having some hormonal issues, then sort of bringing down that cardio and sticking to things like walking and cycling and swimming, things that are gentler. If you've got your hormones dialed in and you're not having any sort of perimenopause, menopausal issues, then, you can keep adding in realizing that those sort of higher intensity workouts or longer runs and stuff that are going to really fatigue the body can affect our hormones and sort of the symptoms that can pop up with hormone imbalance. So if I'm working with a client that, has come to me because they are having a lot of, perimenopause symptoms and, they've been long distance running for a period of time, I'll encourage them to add in a few more things like yoga and Pilates so we can downregulate and bring their stress levels down, and then, start to add in some cardio that's less strenuous like swimming or cycling as well.
So if I listen to all of that, how often should we work out in a week? Because I can imagine for someone who might not have a routine set up yet and hears about all of the things we maybe can or should be doing to really stay up to good health, what is kind of the sweet spot?
So ideally 2 to 3 strength and 2 to 3 cardio. So you want to be moving your body 5 to 6 days a week. That doesn't mean though that they need to be hour-long sessions. So on a Monday, you could do a 15-minute Pilates workout. On a Tuesday, you can go for a 25-minute walk. On a Wednesday, maybe you lift some weights for 20 minutes. So they can be shorter periods, but we want to be moving every day. And then, the thing is, if we go out for a walk and we're feeling good and we plan 20 minutes, but we start walking, we'll probably go 25 or 30 because we're out in nature, the motivation, the endorphins start flowing. It's the same if we start a workout. You might not be keen to start it, but then once you get into it and those endorphins start flowing, we actually then want to keep going because we start to feel so good. So I think if you're first sort of getting back into exercise, look at a few times a week, slowly build it up, but also look at shorter sessions. Look at 10 minutes of movement here, 10-minute walk here, and then gradually build it up over time. But when you do have it dialed in, adding in a good 20 to 30 minutes of movement every day is really ideal.
Have you personally experienced I'm sure you have, otherwise you wouldn't do this, but what's kind of your biggest outcome of doing the daily exercise and eating healthy that has really a positive impact on your life or on your business? What's the most important thing that you've seen by doing all of that?
Well, I think when I was younger, I did it because I didn't want to gain weight, back with, my being younger and wanting to look good. I sort of focused on my nutrition and my movement, thinking that's what's going to make me stay looking good and not put on weight. And then as I got older and I hit my 30s and I had kids, I think that's when I realized more that it's more for my mental health and for my energy. And energy has been a really big one because I've had periods through my life where I have been exhausted. Like many women, I had anemia on and off for a period of time. And once I really started to dial in my nutrition and then also realize that working out hard 6 or 7 days a week wasn't necessary, and dropped it back and started adding in more of the Pilates and walking, and then realizing, oh, look, I'm still not actually putting on any weight and I'm working out half the time I was and doing it in a much gentler way, and sort of understanding more that our health is holistic. Then I think that sort of energy and mental health side really made a difference for me. And especially, now with 2 kids, running a business, starting to enter that sort of perimenopause stage myself, I realize how much just, 15 or 20 minutes of movement in the morning sets me up for the day. I have more energy. I'm so much happier. I feel better. I move better. And then I just show up better for my work, but also for my family too.
Yeah, and especially with that list of yours of all of the things you need to take care of, I want to dive into your business a little bit. We haven't really spoken to it as much. It's been around for 14 years already, and when you started out, it kind of felt like, from what you shared earlier in your personal journey, you just rolled into it. That's how you made it seem. Like, I just decided that was what I was going to do and I went for it. Was it really that easy as well? Or were there elements where there maybe have been thoughts of, okay, maybe not, maybe I should go into a completely different direction?
I always wanted to run my own business because when I was working as a nutritionist, I had a horrible boss and I had dictated hours that I had to work with no changes. And, even coming in and working out of Pilates studios, I'd always go, this is a really good practice. This is not a really good practice. So even from a younger age, I was sort of already picking up that when I was going to run my own practice, this is what I'd adopt and this is what I wouldn't adopt. So I always knew, I think in the end, that I would work for myself, but I wanted to experiment and get experience because I think in whatever field you're in, you will always learn for others. And I think that's really important, to work in different places, learn from different people, learn what's good and bad, especially when you're thinking of starting your own business, because that really helps from the start. And then for me, because I'd looked around for places to rent, a space for a studio, and we couldn't really find anywhere. So what we actually did, which, back in 2008 was not heard of, was, we were looking to build a house, me and my husband to be. And so we picked a block on a corner and I built my studio attached to my house. So the clients wouldn't need to walk through the house. There would be a separate entrance. Being on a corner, there was plenty of space for parking. So that, took planning and forethought. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made because I then didn't have to travel for work. I didn't have overheads to pay for rent. When I had my kids, I could go in and teach or have a consult and then come back out and breastfeed or, do what I needed to do without having to travel and waste that time. And I've always loved working from home and having that flexibility. So the last, few years when everything happened and people started working from home, I'd already been doing it for 12 years. So it wasn't any change on that side, which was fantastic. So, I definitely learnt from working for other people, doing lots of courses, even business courses and things. And then, like anything in business, it's just evolved over time. So I had been teaching locally in the area before I went overseas. So I'd been teaching at a community centre and hiring out a hall, and I had clientele, and I stayed in touch with them when I went to Europe. I would send email newsletters to those clients while I was overseas, updating them on what I would do. And a year later, when I came back and said, hey, I'm going to open my own studio, I had about I had about 80 to 100 clients before I left, and I had about 30 to 40 wanting to come straight away when I got back to start to learn, and do Pilates with me in my studio. And it was different. I was teaching mat Pilates at the community center, and now I was moving to equipment. So it was a different form of Pilates, but I think, keeping that connection with the clients then meant when I came back, I had clients, and then I reached out to different practitioners in the area, and then they started referring people to me, and word of mouth from my clients. So really my in sort of person business, I've never had to advertise because I've always had fantastic referrals from my clients, and then referrals from practitioners in the area too.
Goes to show your authority in that field as well, and your knowledge, and your well, I guess, transformations that you can give people, because that's ultimately, if you do your job well, then the referrals will automatically come and you don't need to market yourself maybe as much. And I think it's something that I've been thinking about a lot throughout the years of being in corporate as well, is where we're so focused on that digital marketing era that we're in right now, and having to do all of these different elements to stay relevant. But at the same time, it feels like we're almost forgetting how important the relationship building with your existing client is, and getting those referrals. Um, yeah, as well. That is almost the best marketing you can ever do.
Yeah, 100% it is, getting your clients to be really happy, and then them just from the nature of the results they get, they tell their friends or their loved ones, this has worked for me, come and try that. You know, it's that, like, they talk about in sort of online marketing, building that sort of like and trust factor. And it's automatically there when you've got your friend telling you. But when you're online and you've just got people sort of scrolling through, trying to build that is so much harder. And I will say, moving into the online space, that has been 100 times harder trying to get clients that way than it has been having an in-person business. And I think it can be discouraging that if you haven't worked in person and you are just starting out online, you can get really discouraged that you're like, I'm having all these people like my posts or see my reels, but I'm not having people buy from me. And that growing that sort of know, like, and trust factor takes so much longer. And it's what I found too, even with experience, in person, it doesn't translate across the same. So I do think online it is much harder to build that sort of know, like, and trust, and create, sort of convert, those people that see your work into customers.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a switch that you've been starting to make, or at least add on to your already existing in-person business, is going more online and having a online membership as well. How has that been for you?
It's been a lot harder. So I had to do, I did online courses to learn about online marketing and setting up sales pages and setting up funnels and, Facebook ads. So I think it's been a steeper learning curve. I found that the in-person stuff, it just came more naturally because I wasn't ever, salesman's not the right word, but I'm so passionate about what I do. I just wanted to help people, and then they would get results and they would tell people. So it was sort of that sort of natural step. And even online, it's the clients that, will see what you do and that have then, purchased or joined the membership. They have often referred friends and family to join the membership too. So again, even with the online world, that word of mouth is still crucial, really looking after your clients, giving them sort of the best product, and, being, honest and having integrity. That's always really important to me, not sort of coming across like I know more than I do. I always say if it's out of my field, I will refer people on to other people. I kind of know my lane, but, it definitely has been a steeper learning curve and a slower learning curve. There's so many more potential customers out there, but it is harder to get people to, number one, even see what you're putting out there, and then number two, connect with it, and then number three, feel that connection is even strong enough that they then want to buy from you. It's very different, somebody to scroll through to see 7 seconds of something and then, they're not automatically going to want to buy. But if you have your best friend telling you how amazing this is, then that is so much easier to then convert them across to becoming a customer.
Yeah. And for you as an instructor, because I can imagine when you're doing things in person, the connection is stronger as well. You're able on the spot to help the person, making sure that they're doing the movements in the correct way, and that they're keeping the neck long and the shoulders down, etc. So how has that been for you as an instructor to also go online and, yeah, maybe not having the possibility and the ability to do that?
Yeah, well, you're right. In the studio, I will touch my clients. I will look them in the eye. I'm constantly watching them. We're talking to each other. We're interacting. We're having those conversations. So you end up getting quite close to your clients and building those relationships, those deeper relationships, and so much easier. So switching across to the online sort of space, when I deliver my classes, because I will set up, the studio to film and things to be able to upload the workouts into the membership, I film the workout like I am literally talking to my clients and they are in front of me. So that's how I deliver the workout, whether or not, there's an imaginary people in front of me, but that's how I teach, that I visualize that there's somebody there that I'm trying to guide them through. And one of the aspects when we did the Pilates course was we learnt that you can't always touch someone. You might be working with a client in studio, but they may not want any physical touch. Or you may not have the ability to demonstrate a move. So you need to be able to use your voice to talk through an exercise. So we spent a lot of time learning how to talk through exercise, how to do them visually to make sure that we could do them also, and then also how we're going to teach people when we can't touch them. So I think that being able to flip between, knowing how to work with a client in person and picking up on those signals can then help you transfer across when you're trying to go online to a certain extent anyway. But, the other thing is, Pilates and health in general, health and fitness is quite a saturated field. There's a whole lot out there. So, I have found that a little bit more difficult because there is a lot on offer for people online in the health and fitness industry in comparison, to other fields.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I've personally found and see with other clients that I'm working with that are in a similar field is because it's so saturated, it can almost become very difficult to stay authentic because marketing tells you to do things in a certain way to be able to speak to your clients in a certain way and convey them to come to you. But if everyone is kind of doing it in that way, it's very hard to stay true to who you are without feeling like you need to do it different because other people are doing it different and maybe seeing the success in a much faster pace. Is that something that you feel has also been part of your journey in going online, or because you've established such an authentic way doing it in person, you're not feeling that pressure as much?
I think there's always that element of comparison. I will follow people online that are teaching, Pilates or fitness based things. And I think, that looks amazing what they're doing and how they deliver it, and the way they deliver it is fantastic. So I think you have to look at it as more as inspiration rather than sort of comparison, because we're all looking and doing things differently. And then also remember that you are going to attract certain people and you are going to repel certain people. That's just a part of life, and that's what should be happening. You want that to be happening to find your people. If you're not, sort of repelling certain people, then your message is generally a little bit too general. So, as horrible as it is sometimes, I've had DMs from people saying, oh, could you just talk a little softer, or could you change your accent, or, it's like you can take that, and sometimes it doesn't feel very nice, But at least I know, okay, well, you're not my person. Like there are people out there that are my people and you're not them. So I think you have to look at it as, check out what's out there for inspiration, but remember that what you bring to the table is only, you're the only person that can bring it in that unique way. And as long as you're sticking to that, I think it's great. In the health and fitness field, one of my sort of pet peeves is you'll see all these clickbaits that's like, do this exercise to have a flat stomach. And it's like, well, you can't spot reduce, you can't get a flat stomach from doing, a single exercise. And so if something like that, kind of pops up from someone, for me, that's someone that I'll unfollow, because that's not, one, it's not helping me. Two, it's not aligned with my values and what I teach. So I've tried to stay as, true to what I know and what I know that works and what has worked for myself and for other clients. And then, I spend a lot of time learning and educating myself, so I'm up to date with, the relevant scientific information. And that may not make me an influencer, and I may not get as many clicks as the reel that says do this one exercise and get your abs. But that's more important to me, that I'm building that trust with somebody. And in the end of the day, if, someone connects with me and buys my product, then they know what they see online or on podcast interviews is what they're going to get in my products.
Yeah, I love that. Feels like a very good moment to start sharing with people where they can find you, where they can learn more about you, where they can maybe jump on your online membership if they're not in Australia.
Sure. So I am on all the social handles. So Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn at Mind Movement Health. And my website is www.mindmovementhealth.com.au, so the AU for Australia, and that has all the info on it to check out the membership. I've got members from England and Wales and Canada and the USA and all around the world. So the community we have of women is amazing. They support each other, they're going through the same similar things, and they really help inspire each other. So, another fantastic thing, that even if you're on the other side of the world, that connection you can have with people is amazing.
Well, make sure to link all of the links below. So go check out Kate and go say hi to her as well when you're on one of her pages. And yeah, thank you so much for being on with me today, Kate, and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Thanks so much for having me on. I've loved this conversation, and, thank you to you as well for, sharing your message and getting these stories out to the world as well.
Wrap up another episode on the Stories to Remember podcast. I want to thank you for being a part of our community. It's your support and engagement that keeps me going. I would also like to request a small favor. If you found value in this episode and enjoyed our podcast so far, I kindly ask you to subscribe. Your subscription not only means the world to me, but also helps me to expand the reach, connect with more incredible guests, and continue sharing inspiring stories. Furthermore, your engagement and feedback are invaluable to us, so please do share your thoughts on the podcast. For now, once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and I can't wait to have you with us next time. See you then.